Thank you so very much. Okay, I really appreciate your attendance this afternoon. I am up against a lot of heavy hitters at this conference, so I wish I could be at their presentations right now. So I appreciate anybody who's managed to decide that this is the one they want to attend personally and synchronously and listen to the other ones later. So I'm Debra Tervala. I'm the Associate Vice Provost for the Office of Institutional Effectiveness at Walden. And let me start by saying I am a very unlikely person to have ended up in leadership positions in higher education. One grandfather of mine was illiterate. Okay, the other grandfather was a sharecropper and presumably illiterate. I didn't get to meet him. They were both from North Carolina. My dad had only an 8th grade education. My mom did graduate from high school, but she was a stay-at-home mom. But I was fortunate to have parents who valued education, and I loved school. I played teacher all the time growing up. I taught my stuffed animals, I taught my cats, I taught my cousins, I taught my younger brother. I had teachers as role models in elementary and junior and high school, and I knew what they did because I saw them doing it every day. So it's not surprising that I started my adult life as an 8th grade teacher in a tiny parochial school in rural Southern Maryland, making absolutely no money. And that year launched me into education, which has been the passion of my life. I did have a few detours along the way, as we all do. I had a promising law career for 5 or so years, but soon realized that while you can take the teacher out of the classroom, you can't take the classroom out of the teacher. So I've had the privilege of serving as a tenured faculty member, a program director, an assistant dean, a vice president of academic affairs, a provost, and now as an associate vice provost. So here I am all these many years later, okay, and I would like to share a few of the things that I've learned along the way. So I appreciate your being here today with me. Okay, next slide, please. Which you just saw. All right, your background, as you can hear from my experience, does not dictate your leadership ability. It can obviously influence it in both positive and negative ways. And most of us, unfortunately, have experienced people who would have never been in leadership positions, but were it not for privilege or assumptions made about their capabilities. But fundamentally, it's what you bring to the table. Okay, and if someone is standing in your way, figure out a way to work around them. Find a mentor who can help you navigate your way. Become familiar with the informal structure of your organization, because that's where the power is. There's the organizational chart, and then there are the people who actually run the organization. And sometimes those are the same people, and sometimes they're not. So find out where the true power lies within your organization. And by power, obviously, we're talking about knowledge and information because we are in an educational setting, right? So find out the people who really know what's going on and learn from that person. You will often find it's the administrative assistant who knows where all the bodies are buried. So be especially sure you don't look down on folks and work in that capacity. Okay. So that's lesson 1. Next slide, please. You are not the smartest person in the room, and that is okay. It is more than okay. It's actually a relief when you accept that. There is always going to be someone smarter, younger, and probably prettier than you in the room, if I can be honest with you. Okay, now, why is this a relief? When you don't have to impress any others with your intelligence, because there's a lot of time and energy and resources that you waste trying to do that. What you do by not trying to be the smartest person in the room is that you create space for other people on your team to shine. And people like to be acknowledged for their contributions. You get better discussions, you get better possibilities, you get more viewpoints, and you get to test these out in a non-competitive, collaborative environment that you have created. So step back, Don't feel like you have to be the smartest person in the room. Lead, but don't dominate. And make sure you're listening to your team members. Okay, next slide, please. And by the way, I did not do well in chemistry in high school at all. So, okay, this next point is obviously related to the previous point. You are not supposed to do all of it by yourself. That's why you have a team. Now, I know this would seem obvious, but I will tell you that one of the hardest transitions you will ever make in becoming a leader is the ability to delegate. And why is that the case? Because you know if you do it yourself and you've always relied upon yourself to do it, it'll get done. And because it's scary to try to trust another person to take responsibility. Okay? Delegation requires that you do trust that someone else can do the job as well as you can do it, and maybe even better than you can do it. But if you don't know your team members and or you haven't engendered trust, you're going to have a hard time. You may end up suffering physically and you may end up suffering mentally. Now, if one of your team members needs additional training or guidance to get their job done, provide it. But don't do their work. That's demeaning for them and exhausting for you, because you will never, ever have enough time to do all of the work of the members of your team. And if you try, otherwise known as micromanaging, they will feel disrespected and they won't trust you, or should they? Okay, next slide. All right. Manage up as well as manage down. Learn how to do both. Now, most people in new leadership roles, understandably, think first about managing the people who report to them. I mean, after all, you're the one who's being held accountable for their work, right? So that means that you are the team's advocate, you're their translator, you're the representative to the larger organization. So how do you do that? You keep your supervisor informed, no surprises, other than birthday parties perhaps, and even then, depending on who you are, you may not like surprise birthday parties. Work surprises are never a good thing, especially with your supervisor. So make sure you keep your supervisor informed. Anticipate what this person needs or wants to know about what the team is doing, and keep that person up to date. Now, this also means, though, that you have to ensure that you are the translator, the representative, the advocate of what's being expected of your team by the larger organization, and notably by your direct supervisor. And this can sometimes get into some fairly tricky territory. Now, I want to assure you that this has not happened to me while I was at Walden, but I have been in other situations where I have had to make a decision at other organizations. If there is a course of action that your organization is taking that you disagree with, as a leader, you've got two choices. You can either acknowledge your disagreement, determine you can live with it, and to live with the direction your organization is going in, and therefore continue to translate and support that action to your team. Or in extreme circumstances, if you feel really strongly about this, then you need to leave the organization. Under no circumstances, however, do you get to play both sides of the coin. You cannot ethically support the direction your organization is taking and with your supervisor, while simultaneously disparaging that action to those who report to you. That you can't do. You're the link between your team and the supervisor. So managing up is about sharing relevant information, no surprises, and loyalty to the organization. I do not mean blind loyalty, but I do mean loyalty. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so know your audience, and I'll say it again, know your audience. I hope you enjoy the pictures. Again, this is related to the previous slide, you need to recognize, are you in an adversarial or life-threatening or career-challenging situation, or are you communicating with people who know and support you? You absolutely cannot assume the same tone, the same style of presentation, the same information sharing with both sides. So do your homework if you don't know your audience that you'll be presenting to or that you are responsible to. What are they likely to want to know? What are the gaps? What are the challenges? What might be misconstrued? Because God knows if it possibly can be misconstrued, it probably will be. So anticipate that. This also pertains, though, to communication styles with your own direct reports and cross-functional teams, and even to your supervisor. All right. And so this leads into what I call email etiquette. Okay, and here's a tip. Your supervisor is not going to read the carefully constructed 12-paragraph email you just sent. Okay. Nothing personal, nothing personal, okay? But sadly, your email is one of hundreds or possibly even thousands of emails that this individual is trying to handle on a daily basis. So to your supervisor,
it is.
So to your supervisor, okay, make sure that you use the subject line of your email carefully to grab attention, not to start fires, but to grab attention. Remember that not everything is of high importance, otherwise it becomes the boy who cried wolf. You're not in middle school anymore, so don't use exclamation points or emojis. And bullet your points in succinct statements. It's also important, though, to recognize when it's time to stop the email exchange and move into meeting territory, okay? Now, for me, that's about 3 emails. If we've already exchanged 3 emails on a topic and we haven't reached closure yet, you're going to look for me to schedule a time for us to actually talk. Now, why is that the case? Because I can't read your body language in an email. I know. Again, I appreciate if you put emojis and exclamation points, I can probably get it or bold it, but nonetheless, that's not necessarily the most professional type of writing. But also, and I think we all recognize that today, people are much more likely to be obstructive or even downright obnoxious in emails and in social media than they are when you're looking directly at them, because you are reading body language. And so whether that's over a Zoom call or whether that's in a face-to-face meeting, just keep that in mind. So, you know, again, you can set up your own personal guidelines for what you want to do with your email etiquette, know your audience, know how to communicate to them, okay? And also, just for all of us out there, never hit reply all, okay? Because that's going to increase the number of emails that goes to your direct supervisor or whomever. Okay, next slide, please. All right, this next one is so fundamental, and it's also sad that we sometimes have to be reminded of this. You need to show respect to everyone. Everyone moves the needle. Everyone contributes to the success of your initiatives. Now, if we were in an on-ground situation, I'd probably say that we respect the role of everyone from the janitorial staff to the president. It's an ecosystem, friends, and if you disrespect or you mistreat one area of where you live or work, that's going to come back and bite you unpleasantly, and you will be lesser than. So how do we demonstrate respect? First of all, we can stop talking and we can engage in active listening, actually listening. You also demonstrate authenticity. You do what you say you're going to do. You recognize the contributions of all of your team members publicly. And you adopt and you demonstrate the most favorable intent principle, okay, the MFI. Do not presume ill intent of others. Now, you can certainly reach that conclusion on your own after being ample evidence of it in someone, but don't start out that way. So that's how you show respect to everyone in your team, off your team, across your university, across your organization. There are no unimportant people. Okay, next slide. You don't have to be right, but it really will help if you understand why you were wrong. Okay, and so this one is about self-reflection and growth. And again, to do that, you first have to admit that you were wrong. Now, you may still contend that you were right, but a more effective way to approach this is to acknowledge that the majority of others didn't think you were right. Now, in education, we would call this a teachable moment, okay? But you can be your own teacher through self-reflection. So be honest, go back through instances where you have been wrong and reflect on, what did I miss? Did I not recognize my audience? Did I try to do it alone? Was I so convinced that my interpretation was the right interpretation that I was not open to hearing objectively the counterpoints that were being raised? Was I so confident of my own invincibility that I ignored the other warning signs? This is hard, it's painstaking, and unfortunately, it's necessary work that we have to do as human beings and as leaders. The bottom line, though, is your takeaway from a failure should not be, well, those people clearly are idiots, but rather, what can I learn from this experience? Failure is an opportunity for growth. Now, repeated failure shows that you're not getting the message. So I'm not advocating that, but I am suggesting that self-reflection and then growth is what we should be pursuing in lifelong learning, both in our work and in our life. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is a favorite one of mine, okay? And it also helps me explain why my background as an attorney, and therefore not someone who came up through the ranks in higher education in the more traditional route of having earned a PhD, okay, may in fact provide me with a better background and a leader in higher education than some of my colleagues. Please don't throw eggs at me. Okay, this is a controversial statement, I recognize, but hear me out. Okay. As a leader, you're going to have numerous people who come to you with their issues. They're going to ask you for help to resolve them. You must recognize that each person's telling their own version of this truth. It is absolutely imperative that you not have a knee-jerk reaction to the truth being told by one person. This is not to disparage that person's experience in that situation, but rather to emphasize that truth is a somewhat elusive concept. That's why there are 12 people on a jury, okay? So I will hearken then back to my legal training, which requires you to see issues from both sides, even if you have a personal affiliation or even a passionate belief about one side, you still must be able to argue on behalf of the other side. So from a leader standpoint, that means that you do your homework. You talk to the others who were involved. I use language such as, I've heard X, please help me understand why that's being said. You're not accusing, you're asking for information, and you're asking to be educated about it. And you're also in the process getting that other person's side of the story. Again, you do have to be authentic. You have to genuinely want to hear the other side. Merely going through the motions is going to be recognized faster than trying to use a counterfeit dollar bill. Okay. And the one thing you don't want to be with people is disingenuous, especially as a leader. So remember to be objective. There are at least 3 sides to every story. All right, next slide, please. Okay. Be human. Be willing to be vulnerable, but don't overshare. Okay. First, and to reiterate, admit when you're wrong. You're not perfect. You will make mistakes. So if you do, acknowledge it. And if an apology is in order, apologize. This allows others on your team to breathe. It also models appropriate behavior and encourages them to also admit when they've made a mistake and not try to cover it up, because that can lead to catastrophic results, not to mention lack of trust and demoralized team members. It is important, though, to recognize that your team members are not your therapists. They need to see you leading with a heart, not bleeding from the heart. So it probably is not a great idea to share with them your marital woes if you have any, or your personal financial concerns if you have those either. And do not go into the territory of unethical behavior, such as bullying or harassing or even dating one of your team members. Think of them as your work family and treat them accordingly. Parents shouldn't share their personal troubles with their children, and siblings probably shouldn't date each other. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, don't take it personally. That 12-paragraph email that you sent to your supervisor that I just mentioned a few moments ago, that person didn't read, and you know they didn't read it because when you brought it up in a conversation with them, they couldn't recall it. It's not because they think little of you or your correspondence, it's because they genuinely have not been able to get to it. Again, remember the most favorable intent. So don't overthink it. Second thing is, don't take yourself too seriously. You will save yourself and everyone else on your team a lot of heartburn if you are able to maintain and even foster a sense of humor. We spend the bulk of our conscious time with our work family. Let that sink in if it hasn't already come to you already. Don't make it akin to being a mule strapped to a grindstone day after day. So have a sense of humor and try to foster it in your team as well. Okay, next slide, please. All righty, pick your battles. Okay, this is more of a life message, but it certainly extends specifically into the leadership role. And if any of you has either a 2-year-old or a teenager, you will know exactly what this message means. You will not win every battle, and you will expend valuable time and energy and resources trying to, not only yours, but those of your team members as well. So this translates into an ability to prioritize and to strategize. Prioritize what is up front and in your face. What are the fires burning closest to you? Sorry, I should probably not have used that analogy, but then strategize. Triage your emails, for example, okay? Recognize the ones that you have to answer right now and the ones that can probably wait 5-6 hours or maybe even 24. Set your daily priorities so that they align with and support your long-term strategies. And don't get bogged down in administrivia. Don't ignore it, but don't get bogged down in it either. So you always want to keep the end goal in sight. Okay, next slide. And last one. Thing to keep in mind, and this is a wise person once said this to me, and I've listened to that person ever since. People don't leave jobs, they leave leaders. And that's what I want to share with you today. I would love to hear comments or questions or whatever from folks in the audience.
Thank you so much. And you can feel free to type your questions or comments in the chat. You can feel free to unmute yourself. And if your camera ready, share your camera if you have some questions for Dr. Tervala.
Hi, Dr. Tervala. This is Christian Sama. Sorry, I didn't show the video, but I hope my vocal is loud enough and clear.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you. I must commend you, your background and the journey to this day has been truly articulated in all of the wisdom that you shared with us today. I thank you for it because it took personal commitment, dedication, and perseverance to be able to accomplish, such a delivery. What you said tremendously impacted me listening to it, and I do value it. And so I want to be able to see if we can have access to stuff like this. I saw it recorded.
Mhm.
Can I have a second time to listen to it again, if possible? If there's a process for it, or how do I get to get?
Right, I believe that's the case.
Oh,
I think
yep. I can respond to that. Thank you. Yes, these sessions are being recorded and will be made available to attendees at the conclusion of the event. So simply watch your email and we will share the link with you to access the resources. And of course, for any other sessions you've missed, you can see their PowerPoint presentations and under the session link itself within the agenda. And I apologize, I misspoke, Deborah. I
It's okay.
misspoke about your credentials once again. You've got a
That's okay.
JD.
That's okay, not a problem. Thank you. Okay.
Hi, Debra. These were excellent tips with examples. I love them. As you were speaking, though, I started thinking about the younger generation, given that I have nieces and nephews that are entering the workforce now.
Mhm.
Do you think some of this is generational, or it doesn't matter? Would you still give the same advice to the new people that are coming through the workforce?
Yeah, I think so. I think, also, again, it's always easy. Hindsight is always 2020, right? So it's always easier to speak about, gee, if I'd known this one, 30 years ago, my life might have been different. Who knows? But I do think that if you were new in a leadership role, know what you don't know. And I know that sounds like a conundrum, but recognize that there are leaders around you that you can learn from. Okay, look for mentors, read stuff about leadership. Good Lord, there is an abundance of materials out there about leadership. But pick and choose. I personally, and I think a lot of people at Walden would follow this. I personally try to follow a servant leadership. It's not about me. It's about our students, and it's about me supporting my team so that we can support the students. I think that when you're first entering into a leadership role, especially as a younger person, without having managed people before, because people are tricky. If you think herding cats is bad, people are much more challenging. Read as much as you can. And again, if you can find a mentor or a colleague that has more experience in this in your organization, I would encourage you to do that.
Okay, there are a couple of comments in the chat.
Mhm.
One of the comments is about authentic leadership is what I felt that you provided, as well as a growth mindset.
Thank you. Yeah, I like to tell people, I guess I'm fortunate in the sense that I'm at the age where what you see is what you get, and I work very hard to be authentic with people. I think that authenticity, again, if you don't have it, you can't fake it. You either have it or you don't have it, and you need to work towards that. So I appreciate your comment very much. Thank you.
There's another question in the chat. What are your thoughts about the whole lean in movement? And for those who don't want to necessarily lean in per se, but just love what they do, and the pressure for us to climb the corporate ladder by our peers.
I would rather than leaning in, I think that, the lean in concept is a little more recent. I'm much more of a second wave feminist myself, you know, which is, you know, following the advice long ago of, if there's not a chair at the table for you, bring your own chair. So, you know, I think that the concepts are very similar, however. And so I do think that, you know, recognizing what you want to get and how you can contribute, being respectful, being mindful of your role in the organization, how you present yourself, how you can learn from others. I think these are all still very true. And so whether we call it bringing your own chair to the table or leaning in, you know, whatever the terminology is that seems to work for you, I think that, yeah, if you want to climb the corporate ladder, first of all, you're going to have a pretty tough skin. You have to be thick-skinned, and you have to have conversations with yourself about whether this is indeed what you want. You know, and I will put in a shameless plug for a panel that we're going to be on. I'll be participating in later on tomorrow, in which we talk about the superwoman myth, or matter of fact, or movement. So, you know, you can hear not just from me, but from some other folks who were actually in this attending this presentation, but other phenomenal women who are giving presentations at this conference about that. I do see, Kathleen, you were asking something, and I saw this comment. I really want to, you know, speak to this. Your question, or you wanted advice about handling conflict between people you lead when they try to triangulate you and do not want to address each other directly. Okay, grown-ups handle problems at the level at which they occur. They do not take them to their supervisor and ask the supervisor to fix that for them. That's what siblings do with their parents. So don't let yourself get triangulated. Now, if these people genuinely cannot talk to each other, okay, then that's when you bring in HR. God willing, they will have a mediation component to that. One of the things, I have done mediation in my life. I'm a trained mediator. And I have done that in the work setting, a workplace setting. It wasn't formal mediation because I'm not supposed to know, you know, I'm supposed to be objective, and I'm not supposed to know the parties that are negotiating or meeting with. But I have used those techniques, but don't allow yourself to be in that position. Either help them figure out how they can talk to each other, sit in the room with them while they respectfully listen to each other, but don't let them do that to you. It's not your job.
That's great feedback. Are there any other questions or comments?
Yes, this is Christian again. I had a question. You know, in leadership position, there are times you have able personnel that get in your institution, or there in your team, and these are really skillful personnel, but you find out that they do not adhere to understanding the strategy and knowing the powers when it comes to the operations of that team or the institution. What am I trying to say? Someone comes in, she's fully able to function well, she's skillful, but then they know that you are a power broker in a ministry or in the administration or in some kind of capacity, but then they overlook that process entirely, and you know they seem to be stumbling. But how do you get yourself to help them when it becomes challenging for them to recognize the power broker system in the system, in the organization, by not trying to divulge or try to impose yourself on them?
I think you could probably, that's a challenge. It is a challenge. I mean, if you have, you know, so what I'm hearing is that if you have an individual, highly skilled individual that comes into your organization, okay,
Right.
but is not appreciating the need to become integrated into the culture and the power structure of the organization. Is that
Absolutely. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. You know, quite honestly, this person's probably gonna have a couple of hard times because, and so if you were supervising that individual, I think it's probably, you can use it as a teaching moment to say, why do you think that didn't work when you tried to do X, Y, or Z? You know, I mean, because you can advise and you can cajole and you can educate to the degree that you can, and you certainly should be doing that because you don't want to set anybody up for failure ever, you know. But I think if the message is not being received, then it is, okay, let's do a postmortem on this and find out what it is that you think could have happened that could have improved the outcome. And through that conversation, encourage that person to do the kind of self-reflection that I was talking about earlier. That would be one approach I would take.
Okay, there's some other conversation in the chat. Lori mentioned being in nonprofit organizations and then became an entrepreneur and opened a brick and mortar business. And there was a question about what was most challenging about that. She uses her 11 years as an owner operator to push back on that imposter syndrome, and has nuanced the subtle practices of intersectionality.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, and I think that you're right. I mean, when you are learning the ropes, okay, as a leader, you are going to feel like an imposter. Okay. And it's like, I don't know how to do this. All these people are coming to me and I don't know how to answer all of this. That's why, again, it isn't just you, it's your team, you know. So when you think that you are accountable, absolutely, but you need to play into the strengths of your team and strengthen them where they're weak. And so that can help when you move away from the it's all me, okay, and I'm the you know, I have to do this all by myself. Then you can relax a little bit, I think, with the imposter syndrome. You know, that's at least an idea.
Right. And again, I think we have a lot of wonderful sessions coming up in the agenda that are going to touch on that too. So lots of additional perspectives from persons of color as well.
Yeah.
Let's see. I think we've pretty much touched on almost everything that is appearing in the chat.
Well, folks have great questions, and I really appreciate all of your feedback. And I'm you know, excited that people are attending the conference, and I personally am looking forward to the other presentations and panel discussions as well. So thank you so much, everyone, for sharing this moment with me.